Hey everybody, Jerry here, Balance Community. Today we're going to look at how to rig the BC Bungees in 3 fun ways. Let's check it out. All right, here we have a tree anchor, which is probably one of the more popular ways that the bungees will be used. Um, First and foremost, the bungees are not a sling, so do not treat them as such. Do not wrap them directly around the tree because, as they are intended to, they stretch a lot, more than twice their length they can stretch. And so, if they're wrapped around the tree right through here, as they stretch, it's just going to abrade every bounce. Abrade. And so, the best way to do it is to combine it with a span set or polyester round sling. And here I have it done in a certain way. I have the sling wrapped around half of the tree and terminated right at the ends here, right at the edges. And that ensures that the bungee is fully floating. So there's no possibility of any part of the bungee rubbing against the tree while it stretches. And also minimizes how long it is. This is a pretty small tree than what you should be using for freestyle lines, but that's just to demonstrate. Sorry for my voice. I'm feeling a little sick today. Um, and so another important thing is because of how much stretch there is in the bungees, like you'll see during use, these will go all the way out to here, back and forth. You need to have a good amount of distance above the ground or anything beneath where your line is rigged. So rig a good distance up the tree here to ensure that you don't braid while you're on the line. And as you can see, the bungees are rigged in a V shape because this is a V type bungee. And I used our standard aluminum leash rings, the pair of them, the loops, as the focal point here. And that just provides a nice rigging spot. You can clip pretty much everything to it. Like you gotta have 3 shackles in addition to the bungee there. This specific ring set will work for all the bungees too. And so it's a good size to have on hand for that. Um, and since it's redundant with 2 pieces here and you have your backup attached, any bungee backups, which we'll cover in a minute here, can also go straight to those rings. Now, this is the V5 bungee, the smallest of the V set. It can fit through the anchor hole of the L6 or 620 in this case, but it's a very tight fit. And I don't recommend it because then you have to clip your backup vertically. It's just not a good solution. And so, some important things with regards to the bungees themselves. When you set them up in a V like this, you want to make sure that both sides of the V are pretty much identical in length. You don't want it offset to one side because then you're going to get a diagonal bounce and it will instigate surfing in the line as well. So keep that in mind. Keep your legs the same length. Now, this particular method that I did, it's hard to keep up on the tree, which I mean, these Tree Pro help. And so when you're trying, if you're like working above head or in a finicky spot, it can be really tough to deal with this type of specific anchor. And so there's another way to do it that helps keep the sling up on the tree. And so what you do is use one span set to go halfway around the back, and then you have another span set that comes around through that and then back through. Same on this side, around, through, and then back through. And it kind of just cinches the sling around the tree. And so one thing about this set up is you're now fully capturing the tree here. It is smashing the tree. And so this is not a good solution for perma rigs because you will be suffocating this tree. And so if you're on a perma rig, don't do this type of anchor because it will potentially kill the tree, even with Tree Pro and big wide span sets like that. So try to leave a channel for sap to go up and down on the tree like we did on the other side, if it's a perma rig. But if it's a quick rig, this is fine. Um, yeah, and it's a good solution if you have out of reach anchors that need to stay up high while you're rigging. And so to anchor the bungees to the slings, you just use a shackle or something through both loops in each sling and then anchor it off here. And if your shackles are real close to the tree, try to orient the pins such that that pin head doesn't dig itself into the tree. Just be mindful of that. And so for backups for this type of rig, you'll see I have an additional span set. And an important thing for this type of backup is you want it to be above the line because of how much these stretch. Look how long that additional sling needs to be. It's like almost twice as long. And you'll see like when you bounce it, you'll get close to maxing that out even. And so it might even need to be a little bit longer. And so if you think about it, if you load those, that's into quite a bit of additional length in the line that you will drop a good distance. And so to mitigate that, we raise it up a good bit, probably like a meter above your anchor. And also that keeps it off the ground while you're on the line, which is nice. And as I said before, you can clip it directly to those rings if you're using a dual ring setup here. If you have a single connector here, you're going to have to bypass it. Go straight to your web lock and back up. You want to make sure that this backup encapsulates both the main and the backup lines. And since we have redundant rings there, we have it. Um, yeah, I think that's a good introduction to tree anchors. And now I'm going to re-rig this in another way and show you some additional ways to use these things. One other thing about the tree anchor backups is if you're using span sets, I like to put a little knot real close to the end. This is still plenty strong for the purple span set because like when you're bouncing, there's so much movement right here. And so if it's just a big loop, this can like move around and like shift inside the shackle quite a bit. And so it's good to if you capture it with a little loop at the end. And so it can't move that much within this sling. It's it's fixed in this spot. And that'll help keep everything tidy while the line is in use, which is pretty important because some shifting can cause weird loading. You might accidentally like move the sling all the way to here and you might actually load it while you're bouncing, which would not be fun. And so try to capture your backup at the length it needs to be via a loop or a knot or something. Keep that in mind. All right, here we have the next style of rigging with the bungees, and that's with an A-frame. And so to start things off, one of the most important things with A-frame rigging in general is to make sure you have that angle behind the frame so that there's downward force on the frame itself. And the flatter it is back here, the less the downward force. And so you want to find an angle between 45 degrees with the ground and a little bit bigger. I would say that this is probably the lowest angle you want. Anything that's uh, taller there, more obtuse from here to here, will be not enough downward pressure on the frame because if you don't have enough downward pressure, when you're bouncing the line, your frame could lift off the ground and topple, really, which is pretty dangerous. And so, to achieve the V style here, we have to rig unconventionally on the frames. We have to go between each leg here, which can be a little tricky depending on what kind of poles you have. Here I have aluminum pipe, which is circular. And so it can be pretty hard to get a grip on that. And so there's some cool tricks here that we can explore here in a minute, um, that make that a lot easier. And so behind the frame, you also need a V. And so here I have this is standard basket hitch with one sling with a shackle. And then I put a simple overhand knot in the sling here and then V'd it off from there. You could also do two girth hitches on the tree with two separate slings. Have one coming off this side and the other coming off this side, going to their respective legs. That works really well. There's a bunch of different ways to set that up, but I'll show you how to do this wrap here in a minute. But first, let's explore the backups. And so for the anchor backup, I have a whoopee sling here. It's going to its own sling and shackle here at the master point. And I've done a simple hang sling up here and hung a shackle. So if the bungees were to fail, we'll go straight onto this sling and it will still be lifted by the frame, which is nice. And then from there, I have a fixed length 6 mm AM steel sling going from that shackle to its own shackle to the rings. And you don't want a whoopee sling here because then you have a big open loop like we discussed in the last backups for the spans for the tree rigging. And you don't want a lot of flop or like a lot of potential to move a lot inside this loop. And so it's good to have fixed loops on both ends. And this is the first time we're seeing the tie strings in use. It's really beneficial to tie up your backups using these slings. Just a basic shoe knot will be fine there. And refer to your chart on how long the backups need to be. This is V5, which can get as long as 2 meters folded. And so your backup needs to be about 2 meters long. And so it looks very loose now, but just remember it's going to stretch quite a lot. And so now let's, oh, yes, with some other important things with the frame rigging. You want to make sure that the feet here, this line, is as close to perpendicular to the line as possible. You don't want any offset feet. You don't want one foot back more or forward more than the other, um, compared to the line, because that'll give you an unstable bounce in the line, and it also gives you the potential for the frame to topple, which is super dangerous. Yeah, so let's explore how we do this wrap because it's pretty cool, um, to get a nice grip on your A-frame legs. So, all right, to get that nice grip around pretty much any sort of A-frame leg on a sling, what we'll do is the standard span set shortener, which I'll link a video to. But instead of matching these leg lengths to be the same, keep one short, and the short one you want to wrap around the inside, and the longer one wrap around all the way, and then girth hitch through the shorter one. That gives you a nice high grip girth hitch around the leg. And you can do that on the other side as well. And that's what I've done here. I've wrapped around twice rather than just once, which is even more grip. So if you have the length in your span set, you could do that as well. So let's do it real quick here. So shorter one around, wrap once, wrap twice. There we go. And so another important thing with this wrapping of the legs is you want to keep the height as small as possible because the wider or higher or longer, whatever dimension you want to call that, uh, that is, the more torque it generates on the leg itself. So if you have a big distance between here and where it exits, you can cause the frame to topple forward or backward based on the torque it's emitting on the leg itself from that difference. So try to keep them as level as possible to limit that torque on the line. And so that covers the frames. Now let's jump into bolts and see how to rig the bungees on bolts. All right, here we have a bolted uh, situation with the bungees. And you can see here, I have 4 bolts on this rock, but we're only using 3. But in order to maintain the V shape for the bungees, we need to use the outer 2 in our 3 bolts array to give us that nice V shape. And a few things about the bolt placement. First, it's very, very critical that you have a spot for your bolts that is either right at the very edge, like this, or on a vertical wall where the bolts are in a straight line. And because the reason for that is, again, these bungees stretch a lot. Like the V5 here will stretch for about double what it is now at peak force. And so if you're on an edge and your cliff goes out quite a ways before dropping off and it's flat on the top and you rig your bungees right there, it's going to abrade every time you bounce. And that'll destroy your bungees on your first session. And so you want to find either a vertical wall or right at the edge of a cliff to put your bolts. And you want to make sure you have a nice open area beneath them as well, such that the line can oscillate up and down without hitting anything underneath. So that's super important. And another thing is you want your bolt array to be perpendicular as much as possible to the line to ensure that your 2 legs are the same length. Um, and so if you have a wall that's a little off angle, resulting in one leg of the bungee being longer than the other, that will give you an uneven bounce and it'll start a surf. And to sort of mitigate that, you can lengthen the longer leg with a short sling or a soft shackle or something in order to get the bungee legs to be the same length. But ideally, you want as perpendicular as possible for the bolt array. And you can see here for my backup, I'm using a BFK with all 3 bolts. And this BFK is quite long. See it drooping down. Here's one leg. And that's because of the stretch of the bungees. You want to, again, this is going to be up to 2 meters long. And so build your BFK backup with that length in mind. So, like, if you're bouncing your line in the middle and you feel a hard bottom, it's likely that you're loading your backup. And so maybe have a friend watch your anchor as you bounce and then adjust the BFK length as needed. And here's another great usage of these tie cords to hold your backup in place because you don't want it on the ground because it will be moving around quite a bit as you session. And so holding it up in the middle of each leg is great with those little tie-off points. What I like to do at the bolts themselves is have separate connectors for your backup here and here. And then again, a separate connector to your master point, which I'm using the rings again, because that allows easy adjustment while the line is rigged. A lot of people like to share connectors there, and that does add some complication for rig adjustments. So just keep that in mind and use separate connectors if you can, because then you can swap out backups or even easily switch the load to your backup sling in case you want to remove the bungees on a perma rig every day, which is a great idea. And so that's the case for 3 bolts. Um, and we can explore some other options here in a minute. But one other thing, if you're forced to rig on a spot that's not perpendicular to your line and it's at an angle, one of a good solution you can do is to use 2 bolts right next to each other and use a very short sling, like 30 centimeters max for each leg length, 1 foot, and that'll kind of minimize the leg length difference. And then you can fold the bungees completely in half and rig to the master point of that 2 point sliding X, and then build your backup in the same way. Because these bungees can be folded completely in half as well as in a V. That also works. Okay, here we have the 2 bolt situation that I was talking about before, where we have an uneven surface that we're bolted into, and we'd still want to rig our bungees. So we did a short sliding X with a purple span set off of 2 close together bolts. You can see this leg is a little bit longer, but it's pretty minimal, probably about 3 centimeters maybe. But we folded the bungees completely in half. Same master point here. Disregard the wedlock tie off. That should be done. But I have the same PFK backup here, but all strands are held together with both tie strings just to keep them up. And here we have the shackle going through all 4 of our grog loops. Be mindful here that you're clipping both ends of both slings here at the end, because if you pull on just one, it will rip the grog out and completely destroy your bungees. So be mindful of that. But that's a good way to mitigate some off-level bouncing for non-perpendicular bolted surfaces. Yeah, I think that covers most rigging scenarios. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And if you decide to get some bungees, have fun, man. They're very, very, very fun.